Hello, it's Farmington Mayor Nate Duckett. Welcome to another episode of the Mayor's Table. I have a lot of special guests with me today and some that will be joining us partway through this episode, but we want to make sure we let our community know what's going on here in Santa Fe at the state capitol, where a large group of your elected representatives have come together to fight for jobs and many other issues that we're dealing with right now here in the state. So let me introduce everybody who's at the table today. We have Senator Steve Neville, who's here, Farmington Councilor Janice Chiquino, County Commissioner Glogene Todicini, House Representative Rod Montoya, and Farmington City Councilor Janine Kelly. So we'll also be joined by Senator Bill Scher here in just a minute, and there are others who also joined us here today, including City Manager Rob Mays, Public Relations Officer George Ed Allen, San Juan Safe Communities Director Greg Allen, and of course Jermaine Chappelle, who's our representative here at the Public Regulation Commission. We have a lot of strong people here, a lot of great minds, greater than mine, I can assure you, who are out there doing the hard work for us here in Santa Fe. And I know it's not an easy job. Public Regulation Commission today, this is actually January 30th, so this is a tape delay for you. But today the Public Regulation Commission had a hearing in regards to San Juan Generating Station and the issues of P&M's abandonment. And we wanted to make sure that we were here for that hearing in order to provide some context as needed and also representation, just from the City of Farmington standpoint, San Juan County standpoint, to make sure that that commission understands how important it is to us, the jobs that are at stake right now with the potential closure of San Juan Generating Station. A lot of things took place during that hearing, but the feedback that we get and being debriefed afterwards is that it was a positive outcome for us. Positive in the sense that the PRC is finally taking the steps necessary to hear our concerns regarding P&M's plan for closure. So abandonment is a whole other process. There's an application process that P&M must go through, which gives the public and any interveners in this situation the opportunity to speak out, to let them know, the commission know, their concerns about the potential closing of this plant. And certainly from our standpoint, it's the impact to our local economic base that we're concerned about, the school districts, CCSD, the college that are impacted by this, but also the ratepayers of New Mexico. And we have made this case, and we continue to make this case, that our belief is that the closure of the San Juan Generating Station is going to lead to higher rates for P&M customers. And I think the math really tells the tale. So if you're out there and you're listening and you're in P&M's service area, this is something that should concern you. Glogene, today you were there with us, and one of the interesting things that I thought came out was the chairperson had made a mention of the fact that the Navajo Nation needs to be collaborating in this regard, and also the impact to the schools. And I know this is something you're very passionate about. What was your thoughts today?
I was very pleased that the chair, the PRC chair, stated that. Most of my constituents are Navajo citizens, but all the commissioners are very, very concerned because it's going to affect the livelihood of our people within the San Juan County area. And even more is the educators are also expressing their concern that there might be possible school closures. And teachers and parents out there who have sent their kids to school, the impact of this is going to really hurt our area. So I think that Navajo Nation needs to come forward, and just like the PRC chair stated, we need to collaborate, we need to put our minds together and see somehow that we can get this funding that's important, that helps our schools, our colleges, and our community all over in the area.
That's a great point, and it ties in to actually something that I read today that came out of House Speaker Egoff's office, and it dealt directly with this idea that we can end poverty right now for a generation of children in New Mexico. How are we going to end poverty for a generation of kids in northwest New Mexico with the closure of this plant? How are we going to replace those jobs? Those are good paying jobs. Those are schools that need funding. And if 40% of that funding comes directly from this power plant, that's going to be pretty critical. So, I mean, just looking at the broader scope of this, Steve, you're dealing right now with kind of the tax reform issue, a lot of things that are tied into that, but I also know that we're working on things even just through the Senate in regards to how we're handling San Juan Generating Station. And we're wanting to work every front that we can because it's important for people to understand that there's a lot of things at play here, and there's a lot of stakeholders at play here. But if our primary focus is on maintaining jobs, there's also another side to this that we all need to be aware of in dealing with what P&M is asking for. In your mind, what exactly is going on right now in the Senate with regards to that?
Well, P&M has asked for a provision. It's called securitization. The securitization program allows them funds so that they can close the plant and then advance into other types of generation as they need to serve their customers. They're talking about a lot of renewables in the bill. They're talking about wind and solar possibly, but they're going to have natural gas generation. So what we are trying to do, if this goes forward, and there's a lot of people that are interested, both pro and against this legislation, but if this went forward, we want to make sure that we minimize the impact to the school district. As Commissioner said, we want to try to do what we can to maintain the tax base, because that school district can lose substantial amounts of funding that they get for maintenance, and as well as the bonding of the schools. They have close to a $40 million debt out there. The private property in that district is only north of the river between the Hogback and the city limits of Farmington. That's the only private property besides the power plant that exists out there. Right. When you close that plant down, you lose 45% of the property tax base, and that can be devastating financially to the school district. So we're trying to do as much as we can to minimize the damages if this proceeds the way P&M is trying to advance it. If they close it in 2022, as they're looking at, we want to make sure that we can minimize the impact as far as property taxes. We want to do everything we can for jobs. Certainly we can. If we can get some of that generation back, it will replace a few jobs, very few relative to what a power plant and a coal mine generate, but we want to do what we can to minimize that. The other thing they're talking about is some kind of funding to come out of the process that would allow us to assist in relocation or retraining or new industries. We might use it to build buildings or to do any number of things that would help with the economic development to try to replace any lost jobs out there. So that's from the standpoint of, if the P&M proposals go forth, we want to minimize the damage as much as we can.
Sure. So I know that the Albuquerque Journal has already made a comment in regards to this process that occurred today, or the decision by the PRC Commission, which was passed unanimously 5-0, to put in basically it's a procedural rule that's going to require P&M within a 30-day period to come back with an abandonment application. Now, we don't know whether or not they can meet that or not, but understand this: the abandonment has been a part of the process that we've known about for a very long time. So when we see a headline that says that the PRC is pushing forward with the closing of the plant, this has all been a part of this plan process since 2017 when the IRP came out. So there's no real news in that. But for us, it just gives us another chance, as somebody who is very interested and has a large group of people who are very interested in the future of this plan in regards to jobs. It gives us a chance to bring our story back and be heard again. So I think that's a very positive thing. Moving on to other topics and things that are happening here that are going to directly deal with our city and our county, and certainly northwest New Mexico. Ron, I know the methane rule and the density rule that has been talked about up here in Santa Fe is a major, major concern for oil and gas producers in our area. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. What's going on is, quite frankly, there is a lot of legislation that is determined to cut back on the reliance of oil and gas. And to do that, quite frankly, it seems to me they're putting further restrictions and trying to make it harder for oil and gas to either get permitted through the state land office if there's state lands that they're needing to drill on. But in particular in San Juan County, since we are more reliant on natural gas, the methane rule, which I do not believe is going to come to legislators, that seems to be that's something that the governor is going to try and institute by regulation. And I believe that something is coming your way. Don't know yet what that's going to be. She has made statements to House Republicans that she understands that if she goes too far, it could really harm the small producers. However, she made that statement, and then as we saw this week, she's entered the discussion of the Paris Accord and is saying that we need to reduce emissions and It's gone from just being carbon emissions to the discussion about methane emissions. One of the rulings that the OCD had pushed forward before the end of the Martinez administration was to allow drilling at different levels. It was called the pool rule. In reality, that was a very positive step towards capture of methane, because a lot of these marginal wells that are just not producing much now, the choice is to either abandon them or cap them, plug them, or to, in this instance, spend the necessary money, put new infrastructure there that would capture the methane, but would also be drilling to a different pool, make that well more profitable. But it would have killed two birds with one stone. It would have brought in more natural gas, provided more funds to the state and to local governments, but it also would have been a new. They would have been able to, through this process, to capture more of the emissions that are escaping. It doesn't appear as if capture is necessarily the purpose of some folks here in Santa Fe. It does appear that eliminating wells and making them to some degree not profitable seems to be at least the purpose of some here in Santa Fe.
You know, it's just an interesting thing when, and maybe Steve, you can tell me how much does oil and gas money account for in the state budget? Is there a...
Well, long term, it's about a third. This year, in particular, it's about 45%, maybe even as much as 50%. We're going to get a new revenue estimate in a few days. We'll know a little more, but this year, and the next year probably as well, we're going to be looking at well over 40% of the total revenue that we have available to spend in state government. It's going to be oil and gas generated, mostly out of Lee and Eddy counties. But, you know, we talk about how we're concerned about how things are slow in San Juan County. When you take Bernalillo out, it's basically Lee, then Eddy, then San Juan County. Bernalillo still tops because they're bigger, but we generate still a substantial amount of revenue to the state of New Mexico, far more than virtually every other county in the state, with the exception of those three.
And how do we pay to get a generation of children out of poverty if we're trying to cut the legs out from the primary breadwinner that feeds our state? So, I mean, in reference to schools in and of itself, I mean, how do oil and gas revenues assist in the schools? How much goes to schools?
Schools are 45% of our budget. We have a $6.5, $6.7 billion budget. We're not final yet. We don't know exactly where we're going to be, but 45% of that goes to education. It pays for the schools. And that's our major item in the budget that we have to pay for. So half of the schools, almost half of the schools, are paid for by oil and gas. It doesn't matter if you're a Santa Fe school or a Farmington school, it's still the same. And we use a formula. We take the money, we collect it all at the state level, and we send it back out to the schools. So it's pro rata to every community on roughly the same basis. So we spread that money around. So oil and gas, when all the money's coming out of Lee and Eddy County, it's going everywhere. It goes to Clayton, it goes to Silver City, you name it. It's all over the state. And that's how we pay for schools in the state.
Some people may ask, 45% of our budget goes to education. What is Colorado or Texas? I mean, you guys have any idea what that? I mean, obviously it's a bigger state, bigger population, so maybe it's different.
I think the proportions are roughly the same. It may vary a little bit, but most states, education is their primary requirement, you know.
Okay.
The one thing on that, though, is oil and gas industry, since it's such a big portion of our state budget, we are more reliant on one industry to pay for education. Most other states have pay for education funding a lot out of property taxes. Since we have gross receipts tax, and that includes so many other things, our overall tax burden is about the same as our neighboring states currently, but the source is different. Since we are blessed with natural resources, that's been a major funding source for education. We cut back on oil and gas, and we cut back on there's been discussion from this administration and the opposing party of going and taking money out of the
Permanent
land
fund.
grant permanent fund. That will mean that in future years, we fund education out of that as well from the interest that comes from that fund. So if you take away from the corpus, there'll be less interest that
Right.
we will be able to send out. So a lot of the things that are being proposed seem to be counterintuitive.
That's exactly how I feel. I mean, every time I read a story and then I read somebody's comment about the importance of children and jobs, I think, what are we doing to ourselves then?
Well, our permanent funds generate about $1 billion that we used to spend on it, primarily on education. So those income off of those permanent funds, that income off of those permanent funds is already a major contributor to our budget.
You know, in the news yesterday, of course, Governor Grisham issued her executive order, essentially signing New Mexico on. Due to the amount of information on today's special segment of the Mayor's Table, live from Santa Fe, we will be breaking into a second episode that will air tomorrow. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you then.